The Natchez Trace Parkway is a scenic route which is run by the National Park Service. Let's hit the brakes and start again. This time we'll ask questions. Where is the Natchez Trace? What is the Natchez Trace? And why is there a Natchez Trace? On our first day through the trace, let's find out and answer those questions. The Natchez Trace is a road from Natchez, Mississippi to Nashville, Tennessee, a vital route during the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The Natchez Trace first took shape thanks to animals. Ancient herds of deer and massive bison, once common in this area, migrated on dry ground following ridgelines with access to water sources. Their hooves cut a trail through prehistoric forest and open grasslands, connecting grazing grounds to natural salt licks. Native Mississippians followed, using the trail to travel and hunt. As the climate warmed, they created settlements in the region, many along the route. Complex civilizations, thousands of people strong, took root. They left their mark in the earthen mounds that can still be visited along the Natchez Trace. The President, in 1801, Thomas Jefferson, authorized the Army to clear out a road from Nashville to Natchez to assure direct communication between the recently created Mississippi Territory and the Northeast. The fewer than 9,000 people of the territory then occupied the east bank of the Mississippi near Natchez. Nearly 500 miles of wilderness belonging to the Chickasaw and the Choctaw Indians separated this distant American outpost from the nearest settlement, Nashville, which in turn was separated by 200 miles of wilderness from the settlement of eastern Tennessee. For the next 2 decades, the Trace was an important part of the most widely used route of travel between the lower Mississippi country and the Northeast. Frontiersmen, taking their products in flatboats down the river to New Orleans or Natchez, finding it difficult to row upstream, preferred to walk over the Trace to Nashville, and from there return to their homes. The Trace was also a significant post route. In times of war, either with the Indians or Great Britain in the War of 1812, troops and supplies passed over it to the troubled areas. It continued in use until the appearance of steamboats provided a faster way of travel between the lower South and the rest of the country. In 1938, Congress authorized the construction of the Natchez Trace Parkway to commemorate this historic road. The Natchez Trace Parkway resembles a park more than a highway because of the means of exhibits, wayside markers, museums, and sections of the old road in its right-of-way. It tells the story of the old Natchez Trace and the region it traversed. Here we see all the stops along the Natchez Trace Parkway, and for our first journey, we stopped at all that were open. I would first recommend that you stop at the Natchez Welcome Center to get some background information and a map, both of which are very useful. Also, I will be showing a map in 30-mile sections to try to make more sense of this 444-mile drive. The drive took us 4 days, stopping at every turnout. For this video, some turnouts will just show a sign, which you can pause on if you'd like to read the entire story. The more interesting stops, we will linger a little longer. This is day 1 of the Natchez Trace Parkway. When we traveled the trace, it was in October, and for the most part, we were the only ones on the road. On the trace, there are no stop signs, and the speed limit for the most part is around 50 miles an hour. Our first stop was the Elizabeth Female Academy, which was established in 1818. One thing you will notice on the trace is that the park is in need of some TLC. The ruins are just a short walk from the turnout. Here you can see the one remaining wall. These markers are at the entrance to each turnout. Well, for the most part. Some were missing, which caused the Tiger to do a 3-point turn to go back and view the turnout. Emerald Mound, near mile marker 10, is a true jewel. Built by the Natchez Indians around 1400 AD, this magnificent ceremonial mound is the second largest of its type in the nation, covering nearly 8 acres with a trail leading to the top. This is Mount Locust at mile marker 15, hospitality frontier style. Before 1820, as many as 50 stands like Mount Locust were established to host weary, thirsty travelers. Mount Locust is the only one remaining. Stop and drink in the history. We would have loved to have stopped and enjoyed the hospitality of Mount Locust. However, it was closed. And not only that, RVs were not permitted. More on that later. Many turnouts are for the location of stands. When you think of a stand, think of a Kool-Aid stand. In this instance, a stand is a business that sells items to travelers, such as coffee, sugar, salt. Travelers were expected to hunt their own meat on the trail. Here is the next 30 miles. This section of the trace was our first glimpse of the old trail. It lies sunken between 2 deep walls, hence the name Sunken Trace. Here you can see a tree that was severely damaged by a storm in the not too distant past. To get to the next two sites, the Tiger had to go under a bridge that was 11 feet 6 inches. Let's see if we make it. Excavation of Magna Mound tells us much about the people of the late prehistoric period. The Plague Mine culture included the ancestors of the modern tribes of Mississippi and Louisiana. It was a society with elaborate, agriculturally oriented religious ceremonies. From the burials on this mound, we have learned that there was a high infant mortality, and upon the death of a chief, a brutal ritual was enacted in which his retainers were slain and buried with him. The Trace is the mecca for bicycles, and on our Saturday part of the trip, they were very plentiful. Rocky Springs, at mile marker 54.8, was the point travelers said goodbye to civilization before they entered the wilderness. It is here, at Rocky Springs, we spent our first night camping. The camping here along the trace is free. It is on a first-come, first-served basis. On the first night, we stopped around 3 p.m. At the time, Rocky Springs Campground was basically empty. There was just ourselves and 2 other campers. However, that would change as we went down through the trace. Camping at the trace requires a self-sufficient vehicle because these are the signs of the times. The next video, day 2, will explain why the trace is not RV friendly and will take an off-road adventure. Thanks for watching.